I know you're tired. I know you've been carrying burdens that no one sees, fighting battles that no one understands. You smile in front of others, but deep down you are exhausted. You have prayed, you have worked, you have given your best, yet the breakthrough seems far away. You wonder, God, do you even see me? Let me tell you, God knows. He sees every tear you've cried in silence. He hears every prayer you whispered when no one was around. He has watched you push forward when everything in you wanted to quit. And He is not silent. He is not distant. He is right there, closer than your breath, whispering, hold on. I am with you. There was a man named Thomas Edison. Thousands of times he tried and failed before he finally invented the light bulb. People laughed at him, called him crazy. But what if he had quit? What if he had said, I'm too tired? The world would still be in darkness. Your struggle has a purpose. Your pain is birthing something greater than you can imagine. David, before he became a king, was just a shepherd boy. He was overlooked, forgotten, pushed aside. But when the time came, God called him forward. When Goliath stood before him, the world saw an unbeatable giant, but David saw a defeated enemy. The difference was not in his strength, but in his faith. He knew he was not alone. You are not alone. The enemy wants you to believe that you are isolated, that no one cares, but listen to me, God cares. He has been walking with you through every valley. He has counted every sleepless night. He has carried you when you felt you couldn't take another step, and He is not done with you yet. There was a time when even Jesus Himself felt the weight of exhaustion. In the Garden of Gethsemane, He knelt and cried out, Father, if it be your will, take this cup from me. But He didn't stop there. He surrendered, saying, not my will, but yours be done. And because He endured, salvation came to the world. You may be at your breaking point, but God is at His breakthrough point. When you feel you can't go on, that's when He steps in. When your strength runs out, His power begins. This is not the end of your story. This is the moment before the miracle. So stand up, wipe your tears, take another step. God sees you, God knows you, and He has a plan greater than anything you could ever dream. Hold on, victory is coming. God knows your struggles. He sees what no one else sees. He knows the weight pressing down on your shoulders, the exhaustion in your spirit, the silent cries in the middle of the night. You smile in front of others, but deep down you feel drained, unseen, and forgotten. You wonder if anyone understands the battles you're fighting, the fears you wrestle with, the dreams you've almost given up on. But let me tell you, God understands. There are moments when you feel like you're walking through life alone, carrying burdens too heavy to bear. You pray, but the answers seem delayed. You fight, but the victory feels out of reach. You pour out your heart, give your best, and yet it feels like nothing is changing. You begin to ask, God, do you even see me? Do you care? The enemy wants you to believe that you are isolated, that no one notices your pain, that even God has turned His face away. But that is a lie. The truth is, God has been with you every step of the way, even in the moments you couldn't feel Him. Think of Hagar in the wilderness, abandoned and hopeless, crying out with no one around. She had been cast out, rejected, left to survive on her own. But in her darkest moment, God revealed Himself to her as El Roi, the God who sees. He saw her pain. He heard her cries. He provided exactly what she needed at the exact moment she needed it. And He will do the same for you. Your struggle is not invisible to God. He has counted every tear you've cried, every sacrifice you've made, every step you've taken when you wanted to collapse. He knows the weight of your disappointments, the sting of your failures, and the battles that rage within your mind. But he has not abandoned you. He is closer than your breath, watching over you, strengthening you, and preparing you for something greater. You may not understand why things are the way they are, but trust this: God has never lost sight of you. He is working behind the scenes, arranging things in your favor, guiding you through the storm. He knows your pain, he knows your struggles, and he is with you now and always. Your exhaustion is not the end. You feel drained, worn down by life's endless battles, pushing forward with nothing left to give. You wake up tired, go through the motions, and wonder if you can keep going. The weight of responsibilities, disappointments, and unfulfilled dreams presses down on you, and you start to believe that maybe this is it. Maybe you've reached your limit. But hear this: feeling tired does not mean you've failed. It does not mean you're finished. It means you're human, and it means you're in the middle of the process, not at the end of the story. Even the strongest warriors grow weary. Even the most faithful believers have moments where they feel like they can't take another step. Elijah, a prophet of great power who called fire down from heaven, once found himself so exhausted that he collapsed under a tree and asked God to take his life. He had seen miracles, but in that moment he was too tired to go on. And what did God do? He didn't rebuke him. He didn't tell him to just have more faith. Instead, he sent an angel to feed him, to strengthen him, to remind him that his journey was not over. God knew that Elijah's exhaustion wasn't the end. It was just a moment where he needed to be renewed. You may be at that place right now, feeling like you have nothing left to give. But God is not done with you. He sees beyond this moment. He knows the strength that still exists inside of you, even when you can't feel it yourself. He knows the purpose he placed in you before you were even born. And he will not let exhaustion steal your destiny. The pain, the struggle, the fatigue, it's not a sign to quit. It's a sign that something is shifting, something is growing, something is about to break through. When a seed is planted, it sits in darkness before it ever breaks the surface. It endures pressure, it fights through the soil, and only then does it rise. You are in that process. Just because you don't see the results yet doesn't mean nothing is happening. Keep going, keep trusting, keep holding on. You are not finished. You are simply being prepared for something greater than you can see right now. You are not forgotten. There are moments when life makes you feel invisible, overlooked, and unimportant. You watch as others get opportunities, as doors open for them, while you remain standing in the same place, waiting, hoping, praying. You wonder if anyone notices the effort you put in, the sacrifices you've made, the quiet battles you've fought behind closed doors. You begin to ask, does God even see me? The answer is yes. He sees you. He has never taken his eyes off you, not for a second. David knew what it was like to be overlooked. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint a new king, David wasn't even invited into the room. His own father didn't consider him worthy of being chosen. While his brothers stood before Samuel, David was out in the fields tending sheep, forgotten by everyone except God. When the time was right, God called David forward, not because of what others thought of him, but because of what he had placed inside of him. God had been watching David all along, in the hidden places, in the moments when no one else was looking. He had seen David's faithfulness, his heart, his devotion, and when the appointed time came, nothing could stop the calling on his life. You may feel hidden right now, stuck in a season where nothing seems to be moving, where your efforts go unnoticed, where your prayers feel unheard. But just because people don't see you doesn't mean God doesn't see you. Just because things aren't happening yet doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Sometimes God keeps you hidden for a season to prepare you for something greater. Sometimes he is building your strength in the quiet places, refining your character, deepening your faith, so that when he brings you into the light, you are ready. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and locked in a prison before he ever saw the palace. He must have wondered if God had forgotten him. But in every step of his journey, God was positioning him for something greater. You may not understand why you are where you are, but trust this, God is positioning you. He has not forgotten you. Your time is coming. When God calls you forward, no one can stop what he has planned for your life. Faith turns giants into stepping stones. Life will always bring giants. Obstacles that seem impossible, battles that seem unwinnable, challenges that make you feel small and powerless. You look at the size of your struggle and wonder how you'll ever overcome it. Fear tells you to run, doubt tells you to surrender, and exhaustion tells you to give up. But faith speaks a different language. Faith looks at the giant and says, you may be big, but my God is bigger. Faith sees beyond the obstacle, beyond the struggle, beyond the impossibility, and recognizes that victory is not about strength. It's about trust in the one who never fails. David stood before Goliath with nothing but a sling and a few stones. To the world, he was unprepared, unqualified, and too small to win. The giant laughed at him. The soldiers doubted him. Even his own people questioned his ability. But David wasn't relying on weapons, experience, or human approval. He was relying on God. He had faced smaller battles before, lions and bears that had threatened his sheep, and each time God had delivered him. He knew that the same God who had given him victory in the past would give him victory now. So he stepped forward, not in fear, but in faith, knowing that the battle was already won before the stone ever left his hand. You may be facing your own Goliath right now, a situation that seems too big, too overwhelming, too much for you to handle. The odds may be stacked against you, people may doubt you, fear may try to paralyze you, but God has never required you to be the strongest, the fastest, or the most qualified. He only asks you to trust him. The size of the obstacle doesn't matter when you serve a limitless God. The giant in front of you is not there to destroy you. It is there to elevate you. It is a stepping stone to the next level of your destiny. Every great victory comes with a great battle, and every great battle is an opportunity for God to show his power through you. Stand firm. Face your giant with faith. Trust that the same God who has brought you this far will not fail you now. What looks impossible today will soon become the testimony that strengthens your tomorrow. Jesus himself endured exhaustion. The Son of God, who healed the sick, raised the dead, and walked on water, also felt the weight of weariness. He was fully divine, yet he was fully human, and he knew what it meant to be tired, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He knew what it was like to be surrounded by people and yet feel alone, to give and give until there was nothing left, to carry a burden so heavy that it pressed the life out of him. He understands exhaustion because he lived it. In the Garden of Gethsemane, on the night before his crucifixion, Jesus knelt in agony. He knew what was coming. The betrayal, the suffering, the weight of the world's sin upon his shoulders. He was so overwhelmed that his sweat became like drops of blood. He cried out, "Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me." In that moment, the Savior of the world felt the full weight of exhaustion. He felt the desire to escape, the longing for relief, the crushing burden of what lay ahead. But he didn't stop there. He surrendered, saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." And because he endured, salvation came to all mankind. There will be times in your life when the exhaustion feels unbearable, when the burden seems too heavy, when you cry out to God for a way out. You may not be facing a cross, but you are facing trials that test your strength. struggles that drain you, and moments that make you want to quit. But the same God who gave Jesus the strength to endure will give you the strength to keep going. The same power that raised Christ from the dead lives inside of you, and it will sustain you in your weakest moments. Jesus didn't give up because he saw the purpose beyond the pain. He saw the victory beyond the suffering. He knew that the hardship of the moment was temporary, but the glory of what was coming was eternal. You may be weary, but God is working through your exhaustion. You may feel like you can't take another step, but His grace is carrying you. You are not alone in your struggle. The one who conquered death itself is walking with you, strengthening you, and leading you to a victory greater than you can imagine. Your breaking point is God's breakthrough point. There comes a moment in every journey when you feel like you can't take another step. The weight of the struggle presses down on you so hard that you wonder if you will break under the pressure. You have prayed, you have fought, you have done everything you know to do, and yet the situation hasn't changed. You whisper in desperation, God, I can't do this anymore. And in that moment, when your strength runs out, when your endurance fails, when you are at the very edge, that is when God steps in. Moses stood with the Red Sea in front of him and an army behind him. There was no way forward, no way back. It was an impossible situation, a dead end. The people panicked. Fear spread like wildfire. But Moses stood firm because he knew something they didn't. God does His greatest miracles when we reach the end of ourselves. And just when it seemed like there was no escape, the waters parted and they walked through on dry ground. What looked like a dead end became the doorway to freedom. Maybe you feel like you're standing before your own Red Sea, trapped between what's chasing you and an impossible obstacle ahead. You don't see a way out. You don't see a solution. But God is not asking you to see. He is asking you to trust. He is asking you to hold on. Because just when you think it's over, He is about to make a way where there is no way. Hannah wept bitterly because she could not have children. She reached a breaking point, crying out to God in desperation. It was in that moment of deep surrender that God answered her prayer, giving her a son, Samuel, who would become one of the greatest prophets in Israel. Sometimes God allows us to reach the breaking point, not to destroy us, but to bring us to a place where we rely on Him completely. God's power begins where your strength ends. When you feel like you can't go on, that's when He moves. That's when miracles happen. That's when doors open, when prayers are answered, when the impossible becomes possible. Your breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning of something greater than you ever imagined. Hold on, God is about to move. This is not the end of your story. You may feel like everything is falling apart, like the dreams you once held so close are slipping through your fingers. You have fought, you have believed, and yet nothing seems to be changing. The voices of doubt whisper, maybe this is where it ends. But God is not finished with you. What feels like an ending is often just the setup for something greater. Joseph sat in a prison cell, betrayed by his own brothers, forgotten by the very people he helped. He had every reason to believe that his story was over. But what Joseph didn't know was that God was positioning him. The very prison that confined him was the place where his next opportunity would come. In a single moment, everything changed. He was called before Pharaoh, given authority, and elevated to a position he never could have imagined. The prison was not his end, it was his preparation. You may be in a season where nothing makes sense, where the pain is overwhelming and the waiting feels endless. But if God was not finished with Joseph, He is not finished with you. He specializes in taking broken situations and turning them into something beautiful. When Jesus hung on the cross, the world thought it was over. The disciples thought the story had ended in tragedy. But 3 days later, what seemed like defeat became the greatest victory in history. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead is the same God writing your story. Do not give up. Do not let the darkness convince you that this is how it ends. The pain, the struggle, the waiting. It is all leading to something greater than you can imagine. You are tired, but you are not alone. You are weary, but you are not forgotten. God sees you, He knows your struggles, and He has been with you every step of the way. Your exhaustion is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are in the process of becoming who He created you to be. Every great victory requires perseverance, and every great story has moments of struggle before the breakthrough comes. The giants you face, the burdens you carry, the moments when you feel like giving up, none of them are bigger than the God who walks beside you. He has turned weakness into strength before. He has made a way through the impossible before, and He will do it again for you. The battle is not yours alone. He is fighting for you. The breaking point you feel right now is simply the threshold of something greater. This is not the end of your story. Your pain has a purpose, your struggle has meaning, and your breakthrough is coming. Hold on. Keep trusting. Keep moving forward. God has not brought you this far to leave you now. What seems like a setback is just a setup for something beyond what you can see. Victory is ahead. Keep your faith, because the best is yet to come.